Hi everyone, welcome to this channel. Today, we're going to dive deep into something that's often puzzling but rarely explained in detail. Have you ever felt like you're being watched, even when you're alone? In this episode, we're going to uncover one of the creepiest stories you've never heard before. Eleanor Vance never imagined her life would change so drastically on a foggy afternoon in the English countryside. She had left behind her cramped New York apartment and a dead-end cashier job to accept an offer as a live-in housekeeper at an old mansion named Ashgrove Manor. The job sounded simple enough: clean, organize, and keep the house in order. There were no strange requirements, other than to stay on site and not ask too many questions. The journey to Ashgrove felt like stepping into a different time. The narrow winding roads passed through hills swallowed by thick mist. The taxi driver said nothing, occasionally glancing into the rearview mirror with a tense expression. When the car stopped in front of tall, rusted iron gates, Eleanor stepped out and looked at the towering Victorian mansion beyond. There was a turret on one corner, brick walls stained dark with age, and tall windows that resembled vacant eyes staring into the void. She had to open the gate herself. The screeching metal echoed like an old scream that had long been forgotten. The cobblestone path led her to the front porch, where dead leaves swirled in the cold wind and a distant crow cried like a grim herald. There it stood, Ashgrove Manor, more than just a house. It seemed to breathe. It seemed to watch. And in that moment, Eleanor didn't know that she wasn't just another visitor. She was part of something the house had been waiting for. The front door creaked open before Eleanor could knock. A wave of musty air washed over her, wood rot, old perfume, and something else she couldn't quite place. Standing in the doorway was a tall, thin elderly woman, with silver hair wound tightly on her head. Dressed in black, she looked like she had stepped straight out of a faded portrait. Her pale gray eyes were expressionless, and for a long moment, she said nothing. Without a word, the woman turned and walked slowly down a long corridor lined with ancient portraits and dusty statues. The sharp clicks of her heels echoed off the wooden floor, matching the rhythm of a heart that wasn't Eleanor's. She followed, feeling the dampness and chill rise from the very bones of the house. The walls didn't just hold history, they held breath. They watched. They whispered things no one else could hear. Eventually, they stopped at a small study filled with books and strange trinkets. The old woman pointed to a stairwell leading upward, then turned and looked Eleanor dead in the eye. Her voice, when it finally came, was a whisper shaped by years of repetition, carved into her very soul. She said only one thing: never open the third-floor door. Then she disappeared down the hall without another word. Her footsteps faded, and silence returned. But Eleanor already felt it: something upstairs knew she had arrived. And that warning wasn't a rule. It was a test. Eleanor made her way up the stairs to the second floor. The hall stretched on forever, lit by a series of weak sconces that cast long shadows on portraits of grim-faced ancestors. At the very end of the east wing, she found her room. A key dangled from the knob, and when she turned it, the heavy door creaked open slowly. The room was spacious, yet it felt suffocating. Dark wood covered every surface, absorbing what little light there was. The ceiling was high, with floral moldings now coated in years of dust. A four-poster bed sat in the center, its covers neat but musty. In the corner stood an antique vanity, its tall mirror rimmed in tarnished bronze and cracked at the edge. When Eleanor crouched to place her luggage beneath the bed, she noticed something on the wooden floor: a brownish-red stain. Faded, dried, but unmistakably a fluid that had once been alive. She tried to ignore it. But the unease was growing. The walls felt too close. The air too still. The mirror's reflection seemed to shimmer, not with light, but with something else. Time here was thick. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked faster than it should. The curtains swayed despite the absence of wind. Eleanor felt the heavy silence pressing against her lungs. This wasn't just a room, it was a relic. And relics remember. On the old desk near the window sat a leather-bound notebook. Its title was barely legible, but inside, neat handwritten pages introduced it as the Housekeeping Manual, Ashgrove Manor. Eleanor flipped through it, reading routine schedules, cleaning instructions, and general rules of conduct. Nothing seemed unusual, until she reached the final page. It looked blank at first. But under the flickering candlelight, faint pencil marks emerged. The handwriting was different, rushed, uneven, almost desperate. One sentence stood out, nearly erased but still readable. "The third night is the key. Don't trust the mirrors." Her heart skipped. It didn't feel like part of the official guide. It felt like a warning left behind in haste, a message from someone who might not have made it out. No name. No date. But the urgency bled through the page. She turned to look at the mirror in the corner. The crack on its edge now seemed deeper. And in its reflection, Eleanor could still see herself, but something behind her was darker than it should have been, as if the mirror showed more than what stood in the room. That night, the manor was quieter than death. No passing cars. No owls. Not even the whisper of wind. Eleanor lay in bed with the blankets pulled to her chest, but sleep wouldn't come. Something in the silence was too intentional. Like holding breath. Like waiting. At precisely 2 o'clock, the sound began. Above her ceiling, faint creaks, like old floorboards bending under weight. Soft, measured footsteps paced back and forth. Slow, deliberate, as if someone, or something, was walking the length of the third floor. Eleanor froze. She listened. The steps continued, rhythmically. They didn't sound heavy, but childlike. Small, cautious. The temperature in her room dropped suddenly. A chill wrapped around her like wet linen. Her breath came out in mist. She stared up at the ceiling, heart pounding. The footsteps stopped. Then came a tapping sound, delicate, like fingernails or tiny claws drumming against the floor above. 3 quick taps. Then silence. The mirror began to fog, though no heat came from her body. In that reflection, the room seemed slightly wrong. Just a little off. Eleanor knew, she was being watched. And the thing upstairs, behind that forbidden door, knew her name long before she'd even arrived. The next morning, Eleanor rose early, though she hadn't truly slept. The footsteps from the night before lingered in her mind like smoke. She told herself it had been rats, or the old house settling. But deep down, she knew better. She dressed, washed, and decided to explore, perhaps to convince herself there was a logical explanation for everything. She avoided the third floor entirely, remembering the warning. But as she passed the staircase that led upward, something caught her eye. The door at the top was slightly ajar. Just barely. Like a breath slipping through. The old woman had warned her not to open it. But Eleanor hadn't opened it. She hadn't even touched it. She stood at the base of the stairs for a long time, staring. The gap was narrow, but enough to see a shadow pass across the crack. A tall one. Thin, almost skeletal. It moved without sound. Her skin prickled as if cold fingers trailed along her arms. The door creaked softly, as if it breathed. Then, it closed on its own. Slowly. Deliberately. The latch clicked into place. Eleanor backed away, each step heavier than the last. Something up there was real. It wasn't in her head. It wasn't the house shifting. Something behind that door was moving. And worse, it knew she was watching. Later that day, while cleaning the main hall, Eleanor dusted a large, elaborate portrait hanging above the fireplace. It depicted a woman in Edwardian clothing, rigid posture, lace gloves, cold expression. The plaque beneath read, Lady Margaret Elwood, 1892 to 1910. She paused. 10 years old. That couldn't be right. The woman in the portrait was clearly in her 20s. She moved closer, examining the face. The eyes were deep-set and strangely lifeless, but detailed, far more so than the rest of the painting. Almost photographic. When she turned away for a moment to wipe the table behind her, she heard a soft thump. Turning back, she gasped. The eyes in the painting had moved. They were no longer staring outward but now slightly angled, staring downward, directly at her. She froze. Her hands trembled. Dust floated in the shaft of light above her, suspended as if the air itself had paused. She blinked. The eyes were back to normal. Maybe they had never moved. Maybe she was tired. But something inside her shifted. A silent scream building. Eleanor stepped away from the painting, heart hammering. And as she turned the corner, she failed to notice a faint new line scratched into the wooden frame. She sees you now. Night fell fast in Ashgrove Manor. Too fast. Eleanor had spent the day trying to remain busy, polishing banisters, rearranging shelves, anything to stay grounded. But as darkness crept across the countryside and the house grew still once again, dread curled tightly in her chest. She lay in bed, covers pulled to her chin, candles dimmed to flickering stubs. The ticking clock outside her door felt louder than it had the night before. At exactly 2 o'clock, it stopped. Silence swallowed the house whole. Then came the sound again, footsteps, soft and padded, above her. Eleanor clutched the sheets. The floorboards above her groaned as the steps moved slowly from one end of the room to the other. Then they stopped, directly above her bed. She couldn't breathe. The air had grown thick and cold. The mirror across the room began to fog over again, and this time, something pressed against its surface. A hand. 5 long fingers. Inside the glass. The hand slowly dragged across the mirror, leaving a trail of condensation behind it. It wasn't her reflection. The hand belonged to someone else. Someone not in the room. Someone inside the mirror. Then, a low creak echoed from upstairs. The 3rd floor door had opened again. The following morning, Eleanor decided to investigate her room more carefully. The events of the night before had shattered any sense of safety. She opened the wardrobe to retrieve a coat, and noticed something strange. The back panel of the closet was misaligned. A small gap peeked through the wooden slats. She pressed her fingers against it, and the panel gave way with a soft pop. Behind it was a narrow passageway, cloaked in darkness. Dust and cobwebs clung to the air. Her instincts told her to leave it alone. But curiosity had long since replaced fear. Eleanor lit a candle and stepped inside. The passage was short, leading to a hidden room no larger than a pantry. Old dolls sat on shelves. Pages of torn nursery rhymes were pinned to the walls. A child's dress, yellowed with age, hung from a hook. In the center was a tiny rocking chair, gently swaying, though Eleanor had not touched it. On the far wall, something was scrawled in red chalk. She lives in the mirror. She plays on the 3rd night. The rocking chair stopped abruptly. The candle flickered. And behind her, the panel door closed, without a sound. That night, Eleanor barricaded the 3rd floor stairs and covered the mirror with a bedsheet. She tried to convince herself she was safe. But at 2 a.m., the clock stopped again. The air shifted. And something whispered, not in her ears, but directly into her mind. She rose, trembling, only to find the sheet ripped away. The mirror was exposed, and it no longer reflected her room. It showed the hallway on the 3rd floor. In the reflection, the door slowly opened. A figure emerged, crawling backward on all fours. Its joints bent the wrong way. Its long black hair dragged across the floor like wet ropes. Eleanor's reflection remained still, but the mirror figure looked directly at her. Then, the glass cracked, just a thin line at first, then more, webbing outward like veins. From the deepest crack, a dark liquid began to seep out. Thick. Slow. Like blood. Eleanor backed away, only for the mirror to shatter with a scream that had no voice. The pieces hit the floor, but instead of reflecting light, they absorbed it. The fragments showed scenes: a girl being dragged. A fire. A woman hanging from the rafters. And Eleanor's own face, screaming. The third night hadn't come yet. But she already knew. Whatever lived in Ashgrove Manor had chosen her. The morning after the mirror shattered, Eleanor wandered through the house in a daze. Every creak of the floor made her flinch. Every gust of wind against the windows sounded like whispers. In her desperate need for answers, she returned to the small study on the second floor, a room filled with aged books and locked drawers. She hadn't noticed it before, but a drawer beneath the desk was slightly ajar, almost like an invitation. She pulled it open and discovered a leather-bound journal, its spine cracked with age. The name on the first page read, Isabel Elwood. That was the same surname as Lady Margaret from the portrait. Eleanor's hands trembled as she turned the pages. The entries were fragmented, as if written in haste and fear. Isabel spoke of her sister Margaret's strange behavior after their parents died, how Margaret began speaking to her own reflection, claiming someone lived inside the glass. One entry stood out, ink smeared as if written with shaking hands. She said the mirror listens. It feeds on loneliness. Margaret doesn't blink anymore. The last page was dated 3 days before Margaret's death. The writing trailed off mid-sentence, as if something had interrupted her. Or taken her. Eleanor rushed downstairs, journal in hand, determined to leave. She had seen enough. But as she crossed the main hall, she stopped dead in her tracks. The portrait of Lady Margaret was crying. Thin, red streaks flowed from the eyes, down the canvas, soaking the lower edge of the painting. The face in the portrait had changed. The cold, stoic expression was now contorted, twisted in a silent scream. The eyes had widened unnaturally, and the mouth was slightly open as if gasping for air. Beneath the portrait, something was growing. A dark stain spread across the wooden floorboards. Eleanor backed away, and as she did, the lights in the house flickered. Suddenly, from every corner, she heard a sound she had come to dread. The soft, wet scrape of something crawling. She turned her head, slowly. A trail of handprints, bloody and small, began to appear on the walls, one after another, leading upward, toward the third floor. It wasn't nighttime yet. The sun still hung in the gray sky outside, but inside the manor, the clocks all froze at 2 p.m. The air became heavy, the temperature dropping so fast her breath became visible. Shadows began stretching across the floors, even though the light hadn't changed. Eleanor knew she had to leave. She grabbed her bag, headed for the door, and froze. The front door was gone. Where the door once stood was now a wall. Seamless. As if it had never been there. She turned, panic surging, only to hear footsteps above her again, those same slow, deliberate steps. But this time, they weren't pacing. They were descending. The sound of bare feet on wooden stairs creaked ever closer. Eleanor stood frozen at the base, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then. The candle in the hall blew. In the pitch black, Eleanor fumbled until she found a match. With trembling fingers, she lit a candle, and gasped. Across the room, shattered mirror fragments had realigned themselves. Not perfectly. Just enough to form a fractured reflection. And in the glass, something stared back at her. Not her. It was the girl from the mirror. Pale. Smiling. Her eyes void of light. Her mouth moved, though no sound emerged, yet Eleanor understood, "You're mine now." The candlelight danced wildly as Eleanor backed away. But she felt it, ice-cold breath on the back of her neck. She spun, but no one was there. Then the whisper returned, like silk sliding across her brain. She lives in the mirror. But now, she walks free. Eleanor was never seen again after that day. When the estate agent came a week later, responding to her sudden silence, the manor appeared empty. Her belongings were neatly packed. The journal was gone. The portrait of Lady Margaret was different. It now depicted two women. One was the original Lady Margaret. The other had familiar features. It was Eleanor. Her eyes were wide. Frozen. And she, too, was beginning to cry. From outside, Ashgrove Manor looked untouched, just another old house with peeling paint and creaking walls. But at exactly 2 a.m. each night, if you walk past its iron gates and listen carefully, you'll hear footsteps on the stairs. And sometimes, a voice from the broken mirror, softly calling for help. But don't answer. Because once the house knows your name, it never forgets. That was our story for tonight. Do you think it's just an ordinary tale, or is there something more to it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. See you, if you still dare to watch next time.